And so thanks again, all of you, Mike, Gary specifically, and Anne-Sophie for taking the time to present out your lessons learned on social sourcing research. It's super great to have you. We have a small group online today, but we have lots of people interested in a topic per se, because obviously we're all working towards progressing in the field of social procurement and helping social entrepreneurs work directly with companies. We've in the last session, hey Mark, in the last session,
hey there.
We had the chance to already hear from Mark from MovingWorlds. We heard from Stefan from Social Entrepreneurship NL, and our team at Yunus Social Business said a few, gave a sneak preview of the research that's currently still being conducted and going to be released later this year on this very topic. So because we didn't want to squeeze in everybody into one session, we said, let's split it up in two and use the insights really also as an opportunity to learn from it, and then build all the work that is currently ongoing under the COVID Alliance, all of these lessons learned, so we don't duplicate or are not in addition to anything that's already going on in the sector. So that's why it's so great to have you, and thanks again for taking the willingness to share here, especially for those of you, and specifically Mike, for whom it's super late at the moment. I think it's 11 p.m. or almost midnight your time.
Yeah, it's just after midnight.
Oh wow! So we'll jump right into it, and I just wanted to introduce Mike from Social Traders in Australia. And Mike will leave us after that because it has an early start tomorrow. But thanks again for making the time. And the Social Traders, for those of you who don't know the organization, one of the trailblazers in Australia to enable social procurement in the market for years now. Mike will share a bit more of the track record. We had the chance to speak with Mike and the team a few weeks ago, and I think there's lots of inspiring elements in the work that Mike is doing. And I know that Mike knows Gary already. I'm sure that some of you have already talked to Mike already, or to Social Traders at least in one capacity or the other. So with that, I'll just hand over to Mike. And again, thanks for sharing and looking forward to it.
So Daniel, are you going to share the presentation from my side, or are you going to?
You are free to share. You should be able to share screen.
Free to share. Okay.
Without hosting rights.
Let me pull that up.
And while you do that, Mike, maybe just as an introduction, there's obviously the participants in the corporate cluster of the COVID Alliance on the line with Yasmina and Emily from Acumen. We have Mark from MovingWorlds, and I mentioned Cecilia from Agora Partnership. We have Jens and Anne-Sophie from IKEA Social Entrepreneurship. We have Jessica from EY. We have Gary from the Social Entrepreneurship World Forum, and then a few of our team members, and Mark just dialing in twice. Better safe than sorry. That's good. I like that. With that, over to you, Mike. Thanks a lot.
Great. Well, hopefully you can see that. I've just put together just some slides here to talk you through it. And you're probably wondering, well, how come I've got this funny accent coming from Australia? It's because you probably gather I'm originally from Scotland. So there you go. And I'm recovering from a cold, so forgive me if a little bit croaky. But look, what I've tried to put in here is just a few slides to talk you through some of the milestones and the key learnings for Social Traders. I should preface what I'm going to say here in the sense that I only joined Social Traders as the CEO 6 months ago. Prior to that, I was in the sector running social enterprises in a disability organization, and prior to that in a lot of corporate roles. So what I'm going to cover here is a testimony to the organization which I joined, because it was one that I really admired. So, but I can relate a lot to the journey that they've been on, which is good. So just in terms of that, how long have Social Traders been around? And I'll describe it a little bit more in a moment. It is over a decade now that the organization's been there, and I won't go through all of these specific timelines, but you can see there's some research goes back to 2010. And in fact, if you go back a little bit longer, if you go back to 2009, and that's when Jerry will remember the Social Enterprise World Forum, where Social Traders helped host that event. It's not quite on this timeline. This is put together for another reason. So there's been a long, I guess, involvement and knowledge build up of the organization in the sector as it's grown, not only here in Australia, but hence the connections we have with guys like Jerry and also into Canada of colleagues across the water in IKEA as well, and obviously what's going on in Scotland and England, we've had some ongoing connections with. But suffice it to say, there's been a lot of things that have been done, including, for example, in 2014, there was some research that was done. And then all the references, as you can see, to Victoria are a lot of involvement with the government here in Australia, specifically focused more so, I guess, at state government level rather than national or federal level. And we can maybe talk about that a little bit more, because in terms of some of the key milestones that have happened, probably 2017, you can see some reference to the Victorian government. And you might, for those that haven't been to Australia, Victoria is one of the states in the south east. That particular government put forward the Victorian Social Enterprise Strategy and launched it at that point in time. And then followed by a year later, actually then launched what's called the Social Procurement Framework. And social traders were very influential in terms of providing inputs to that state government before, and that's in some ways formed the template for other states to follow. So we can come back on any of this, but I'll just maybe wanted to give you a sense of how long the journey's been so far. Social traders, what we do, we are an intermediary, and we have market tested a range of services. So what we do, and some of you would know this, on the left side, we work with a lot of buyer members. We are a membership organization, so you join as a member, as a buyer, and there's a fee for joining. And equally on the right side, social enterprises join. But I'll start with the left side, where the buyers, for example, upon joining as a member, we have a list of certified social enterprises. And that's one of the things that, so they're looking for social procurement opportunities. They can look into a database and actually see which suppliers are there, which social enterprises are there, and what's their capability. And we also bring together through leadership networks, we bring together buyers together. Sometimes it's buyer and buyer together, sometimes it's buyer and social enterprise, and other times it's social enterprise to social enterprise. And then we also run a lot of staff engagement and training on the buyer side, and indeed then impact reporting. So, you know, how many jobs, for example, or what social impact did that procurement activity have? And we then provide that information back to those members. And those members on the buyer side could be government or larger corporates predominantly. And then on the social enterprise side, you can see there's some things there that are quite, I guess, in some ways unique. Social traders established a certification process. So we spend a lot of time going through organizations, and we actually go through a very rigorous testing process, I guess. Some people call it a test, where we're actually, for those organizations that say they're a social enterprise, and I mean that in not a derogatory way, we actually ensure that they are, in the sense that we would go through their constitution, we would go in a sense, in a kind of open book sharing arrangement. We're part of that process. They would go through, they would even share their financial information with us. And so that if, for example, they say that they are reinvesting the majority of their profits towards their social cause, we will verify that. And then that's at which point they then get this circular light blue trademark, if you like, where they can use that to say, yep, we've been certified by social traders, and we're verified as a genuine enterprise. And that's something that both the supplier side, and particularly the feedback we get from the buyer side, is that's a really important part of the social procurement framework here, because we want to, I guess, in some ways de-risk the sourcing from a buyer side point of view. That, you know, if someone says they're a social enterprise, they are. And as you might know, there are lots of organizations sometimes we see when government is trying to stimulate the economy, they're doing large infrastructure and road projects. And some organizations say, yes, we're a social enterprise, but to be honest, it's so that they can get on the tender list because the state government have mandated that X% of their organizations should actually socially procure. So some people say that, and we actually validate that they're not. In fact, we've had one member who we did go through the validation. They changed what their focus was, and we actually withdrew their membership. So it's quite strong and quite rigorous. And then we also do a lot of work on capacity building in terms of trying to build, and a lot of that is in providing business development support. So the enterprises who maybe where marketing needs support to make that connection with buyers. We spend a lot of time doing that. Accessing to community, so in other words, bringing again the enterprises together and connecting with customers. And of course, the other part down the very bottom of the slide there is the aspect of, I guess, then procurement advocacy, you know, in terms of trying to build the awareness of social procurement and social enterprise generally. And that's where a lot of the influence comes in terms of policy. And a very important part of what we do is data measurement, incredibly important part. We believe if you're going to be influential, you have to have the data. And I think there's probably many people on the call that would resonate with that. This describes basically that wheel in a little bit more detail, and what we sort of try to do on the other percentages, I guess, are an estimate that we try and put in. Where do we spend our time and resource of our headcount? We are about 25 people, so we're not a huge organization, but for a smaller intermediary, that's quite a number of people. And you can see the amount of time on advocacy and evidence, the amount of time there on the certification, which is the big part of what we do, and then the amount of time that we spend on the marketplace. And by that, I'm basically splitting our headcount into a third, roughly speaking. I'm happy to come back and take questions later. And basically the achievements over the last 3 years, if I just unfold some of this, you can see, so in terms of the number of enterprises that are now members of Social Traders, we have 427. And that's a significant percentage growth in the last few years. And we've been refining the certification process along the way. And one of the things that we had initially done in terms of our business model is those enterprises we would hold on our database and only make available to those organizations that, as I said, on the buyer side, became a member. One of the things that we've been talking about with the government here is if we really want this social enterprise sector and social procurement to grow, then we don't want to be a constraint in access to information. So we've actually agreed that we're going to make our database public, and we're doing that at the end of April, end of this month. In some ways that you might think, well, hang on, it's a calculated risk, because if some of the buyer members only want access to the database in terms of numbers, who the suppliers are and what their basic information is, then they may no longer want to be a member. Why would I pay for something that I can access publicly? But our findings are that our buyer members join us not just for access, but for all the other supports that I've referred to on the earlier slide. So we think it's the right thing to do to open up the database, and we're going to do that, as I said earlier, in April, sorry. And then in terms of the number of buyer members, we've ran a lot of capacity building forums on the left, and we help, you know, Victorian state enterprises and now other interstate enterprises become contract ready. And in terms of the marketplace themselves, from a buyer's point of view, we now have 100 fee-paying buyers, and you can see the growth over the last 3 years or so. And we've also got 3 state governments in terms of Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland. So that's, for those that aren't familiar, that's all of the Eastern Seaboard states. They have signed up for this whole of government membership. So they then have access for all of their procurement staff to enable them themselves to do social procurement. And we do a lot of capacity building with government as well. And then you can see some of the other achievements on the right side, which I won't go through. The rich data is very, very important. So maybe talk about that a little bit later. I'll leave that for potentially for questions. And then in terms of deals over the last 3 years or so, it's roughly about $250 million Aussie dollars deals for certified enterprises. And you can see that's been quite a bit of growth over the last 3 years. And maybe in addition to that, what that's then led to, and we can again do a lot of rigorous measurement, that equates to about 1,600 jobs of the most vulnerable people, because we know the kind of organizations that we have certified, and for a lot of people who work in those organizations, there are significant barriers to work because of the nature of the disadvantaged area or the other areas that they then look for supports. And then you can see the number of hours of employability training. We've also, through our connections with a lot of organizations, generated about $14 million worth of free pro bono exchange, or so-called low bono exchange. So it might be supports from some of the larger consulting firms where we work with them to provide support for social enterprise, whether it be legal advice or other strategy advice. And then in addition, there's been some funding donations that you can see down the bottom there as well. So I guess the last 3 years to some extent have been sort of proving the business model. And this is where this sort of phase comes in. So we're now at a stage where we've devised what we call Vision 2030. So it's trying to take this next decade horizon and say, well, if you look on the left side of this slide in terms of the gray area, that's largely been proof of concept. For the first 10 years or so, social traders focused on social enterprise in a very wide sense. Since about 2017, social traders made a deliberate decision to actually focus in on social procurement within that as the biggest part where they could make a difference. And other organizations can be part of the ecosystem alongside us. So having proven the concept, I guess, over the last 3 years, the next phase is to say, how can we scale? How can we scale that up? And we've taken the 10 years and broke it down into 2 bite-sized chunks, if you like. One is through to 2025, and then the second phase is from 2025 through to 2030. And what we're trying to do, I guess, is create a marketplace. You can see that on stage 1, which again is predominantly Eastern Seaboard related, we want to build a marketplace of approximately 1.5 billion to support those entities. We think by then we'll probably grow to about 950 plus market participants. So there'll be 750 or so certified enterprises that we've targeted, and to more than double the number of buyer members to over 200. And that would create, then our modeling shows about 12,000 jobs. And to be honest, I think that's very much understated, because I actually think we can build a marketplace much bigger than this, and I think we can do it quicker. But importantly, as you can see down the bottom of that middle dark blue section, it talks about having strong social enterprise procurement policy in each of the various states, Victoria, Queensland, New South Wales, and then coming on board would be South Australia. And ultimately, we'd like to get that into legislation. It's likely that if any of the states are going to actually legislate, it's probably Victoria. And then stage 2 is to then generate additional jobs. These are the cumulative jobs over the 10 years, over 44,000. And you can see the size of the marketplace. I won't go through the numbers, they're all there. And that's when social traders want to then engage nationally with all the other states. So for example, Western Australia, Tasmania, Northern Territory, etc., and really build this marketplace. Some of the lessons that are, and this is the last couple of slides that Daniel asked us to comment upon along the way. Certainly some positive progress made to date, but in some ways we've still got a lot of more work to do. So we still think it's, in that sense, early days. You know, we do think we need to play this long game and embed it long term. So you might be thinking, well, you've been in the enterprise sector for 10 years, and what do you mean it's early days? It's still a mature and a growing market, as it is in many parts of the globe. And then also enabling policy. A lot of different people around the globe put the focus in the industry, others put the focus in the government. We put it into both, but in particular, we've found that the commitment from government has been for us paramount. And that's why we've put a lot of energy into working with the state government. And from that then, for example, for state government, if they put spend targets in place, and a post-COVID environment, we've been, I guess, in some ways, even ramping up the communication regarding that if government's spending money to kickstart the economy, if they can drive targets into their tier 1 companies who can then cascade it to tier 2, 3, and 4, then that will definitely drive the change quicker. And that's something that we are encouraging. And then again, social enterprise is on the radar. It is in a competitive market in the sense that there are lots of other causes out there that are looking for support. And we think, you know, transparent and inclusive certification is critical. It's been one of the underpinning of what we do at Social Traders, and one of our critical success factors, so that people know that when they see the Social Traders mark, if you like, that they're dealing with genuine social enterprises, and the chance of social washing has been reduced significantly, if not eradicated. Some of the other lessons is just really trying to bridge the supply and demand gap. So that still requires capacity building on both sides of the market. So we work with government, we work with buyer members, but certainly we work with the enterprises. And we are beginning to see some areas where buyers have requested goods or services where there are no enterprises that currently provide that. So we're looking at our ability as a matchmaker, as an intermediary, to identify what those gaps in the market are, and then try and build that capacity through time. And then, achieving the proof of concept that I went through, when we've done that in one sector or in one state, we've then used that, I guess, as evidence for other states to show that what we've been doing in the last 3 years is a proven model, and therefore investment in this area will only scale the jobs. It's not that we want to trial it in Queensland. They already know that there's been some success in other states. And I actually had a call today where I had representatives from the Queensland government, New South Wales government, and the Victorian government all on one call. And we were holding that and facilitating that as social traders. And you know what it's like trying to get government to speak at the state level and where you guys are too. So we're trying to provide that coordination role. And then the other thing is the importance in terms of the lessons we've learned is investing in building the evidence base. So focusing on data really helps strengthen and create the business case. And I think everyone on the call would know that. So that's really all I had to just, I guess, open up the conversation. And hopefully that, Daniel, in terms of time was okay. And I'm happy to stop sharing or come back on that and open it up for questions.
I'm sure there are many. I have a few noted down, but if anybody wants to go first, up to you all. Feel free to unmute.
I can go. That was really interesting and exciting to see just the kind of structure that you've built and the real progress that you're making. I think, tons of lessons to be learned. A lot of our focus at Acumen, I'm Yasmina from Acumen, is in emerging markets, where I think a lot of those preconditions in terms of policy environment, spending mandates, government that's fully supportive may not be present. And I'm just curious, in the journey that you've been on, or the journey of the organization, if there's a sense of kind of, if you want to try to replicate this, what's kind of the right starting point in a very different environment? Or what are some of the key differences if we're thinking about India, East Africa, Latin America, for taking, the lessons learned and applying them? It's a big question, but if there's anything that you're like, the number one thing that we think is important to think about in the context of a developing economy, that would be really interesting.
Yeah, it's a challenging one, like you said. I mean, I guess there's no one place that you start. I mean, I guess it's, as you said, it's going to vary by circumstance and where you are. I guess what we would say is that I know that in some areas a lot of people put focus into trying to get corporate support from large business as a cornerstone of the strategy, and that's fantastic if that can be done. I guess our learning is that alone will not make it happen. And that I guess what was our experience is that engaging support from government is really critical. So, I mean, as I said, I wouldn't say that you don't look for support from other areas, and Jerry might add to this as well, because he's had a lot of experience, as many of you guys on the call have over the years. So, but certainly government for us has been really important. It took a while for us, I guess, to learn that lesson, in the sense that over that 10 years, Social Traders had a very wide focus on the social enterprise sector. And probably some of you on the call would experience over that period, there's lots of people and organizations wanted Social Traders to do lots of things, but quite frankly, they wouldn't fund it. So as an intermediary, I think we've all faced that one, where everybody wants you to do everything, but nobody's prepared to fund the supports to do that. And we've found government were very much part of our mix. So I don't know if I'm necessarily giving you a straight answer, Yasmina, in the sense that go for everyone if you can, but certainly for us,
I think it makes
important.
Yeah, I think it's an important point, because a lot of the emphasis in our discussions has been on getting corporate champions on board and the commitments they can make. And I think it's just a kind of, frank assessment that you really can't see this kind of impact without some level of government support, probably from a policy and a financial perspective. So that's helpful to hear. Thank you.
Yeah. And certainly targets, Yasmina. We're not at targets yet, in terms of government are a little bit loath to set procurement targets. They've done it on one big project where in the Melbourne area, down in Victoria in the southeast here, they've been removing a lot of these old rail level crossings, with the boom gates that are holding up traffic. So they've put in a whole load of removal projects, it's spending hundreds of millions of dollars, and they put a 5% procurement target in that specific project-based focus. we're trying to encourage them to do that against their total procurement spend, not just on individual projects, which at this point in time they haven't committed to do. But that's where we're pushing.
Thanks, Mike. Mark, you unmuted. Do you want to go?
Yeah, I would love to jump in on that. Mike, thank you. Mark Warshawski from MovingWorlds. And building on that last conversation, in our research, we only spoke with one development bank, and they were noting that they were including targets as well, not necessarily for social procurement. That specifically was the Asian Development Bank, and so in just building on that last conversation, I'm curious, in the government and policy discussions that you have been having, is there a part of the government where you've seen more interest from, if it's from groups that are kind of looking at the development side of things or the futuring side, or if it's coming more from elected officials, or where that might be coming from?
Yeah, good question, Mark. A combination, I guess. Certainly in our state governments, you've generally got organizationally those people that are, as part of their responsibilities, is to look at policies for inclusion and economic development, obviously. And they've generally, if you like, saw the light and been supportive. To convert that to action, sometimes you've then actually got to ensure that quite often, as you might know, and it may be the same in your jurisdiction, the people actually doing the procurement are generally a different bunch of people. And often they work for the Treasury Department or some sort of finance area. And they're often a tougher nut to crack, as you might know.
Right.
So sometimes the pathway in is the policymakers, but then converting that into action means that you need to deal with the guys who are actually doing the procurement itself. And that's where I guess we've had some success, in the sense that our capacity building, as we call it, with the buyer side and the government side, is to not be, if you like, shy to engage with those people who do the procurement, and really work with them, and, if you like, sell the concept of what we're trying to achieve here. But then, as you would know, if you're a hard-nosed buyer, you're going to say, yeah, but can you show me results? And that's why the evidence base is incredibly important, because it kind of really provides cut through, I guess, to the argument that this is something that can generate genuine results. And in terms of the other areas that maybe not quite on the banking side, but certainly in terms of our other funding, some of it comes from trading income from membership from buyers and suppliers. Roughly about a third of it would come from funding from state governments, and we put in funding proposals like everybody else probably on the call here does. And the other big area of focus is philanthropy. We've been talking to a lot of philanthropic trusts about supporting and building this network. And it's varied over the years, and I think they've started to change their view to some extent, in the sense that you may have experienced a lot of philanthropic trusts perhaps want to focus in on providing support directly to an entity or an organization, and that way they can see directly the impact of their so-called investment. I think a lot of them are now beginning to realize that there's a need to invest in building this marketplace, and therefore supporting intermediaries like social traders. And we've recently had a $1.5 million commitment over 5 years from a foundation which have just signed up to support the growth in this sector. And they're realizing that entities, that intermediaries like ourselves are really an important part, that really bring it all together to enable it to happen. And I think that's a change in probably the mindset of some of the funders that have been out there to try and build this ecosystem.
That's great. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike. And before we switch over to Anne-Sophie and get you all tucked in and sleepy, Mike, maybe one last question on the certification side. Certification needs time, money, patience on all sides, I guess. Have you seen in your environment also the subsequent markup in terms of additional margins that social entrepreneurs were able to realize from the collaboration, or were they priced at cost like a regular supplier? Like, what's the commercial case for social entrepreneurs for the certification?
For certification, look, certifications for us is a loss leader. The cost to actually certify far outweighs the small contribution that we get from social enterprises, which we've kept relatively low. It's basically been like $500 a year if you're a social enterprise as a member of Social Traders. So it's pretty insignificant, because we wanted to lower the barrier of entry, even though it's only a small amount. We wanted to make it a small bar to jump. So for us, it's not necessarily return on investment in a sense. I mean, clearly that's where the impact measurements come in, where, you know, it's not as though they're investing thousands and thousands of dollars with us in the traditional sort of return on investment calculation, Daniel. So it's more about trying to, of the percentage of enterprises that have become certified, how many are actually seeing deal flow, how many are seeing dollars in procurement actually happening. And having now got 400 plus enterprises in it now certified, our focus is now turning to that capacity building and increasing the dollar value of the flow of trade between the buyers and the enterprises to enable them to get income stream to make themselves self-sustaining, and of course then generate the social outcomes, whether that be jobs or wherever. So that's probably more where our focus is now going forward, to really ramp that up. And that's probably more where we are. In fact, what we're looking to do right now, we've put a proposal into our Victorian government, and if we can get their support, we're actually going to move towards making certification free. Again, so we're moving towards trying to open up this marketplace and really try and provide the growth by making it easy for enterprises to become part of it. And then work with them to try and build their capability. And then, as I said earlier, continue to work with the buyers to make this thing happen.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. I'm sure everybody has loads of questions. I'm just going to share maybe your LinkedIn profile here in the chat for people to reach out, those of you who don't know you yet or are not yet in touch. But thanks so much for sharing at that late hour, and thanks for jumping on. And we're definitely going to be in touch after this. I know I owe you a beer. That will get to you at some point. Thanks, Mike.
Oh, I've always liked German beer, no worries.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Mike. And with that, I'll hand over to Anne-Sophie from IKEA and walking us through the handbook. We had shared it last time around already during the call, but always great to get a bit perspective on the person who actually came up with it. So thanks a lot for making it, Anne-Sophie. I know you're super busy. We're looking forward to hearing from you.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm more than happy to share. And yes, so I actually took out some slides because it can be a little bit difficult to show directly from the handbook. So please, during the presentation, just interrupt me or ask me questions, etc. So we more can have it as a dialogue, as you might have seen it before. So I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, can you see it?
Yes.
Yeah, great. So I will share a bit about the handbook and why we came up with it and what's the background. So I will also give you, I guess that Jens has given you the background about how we work with social entrepreneurship at IKEA. And I will not go into details, but I think some is needed, especially where I'm sitting, as I'm sitting in business. And the whole background to develop this handbook was actually, Jens and I, we were sitting one afternoon, I think it's a couple of years ago now, time flies. And we were discussing that how can we really, I mean, there is so much knowledge and learnings and that we have learned. And I mean, I've been working with this now since 2013 in different positions. And we have learned so much from being extremely small, extremely new, I would say. And also social entrepreneurship was quite new when we started, especially if you really wanted to integrate it in the supply chain that we have done. And we were getting more and more people on board, and we then needed to sorry, I just need to ask my daughter to be a little quiet. Just give me one. The benefit of sitting at home, right? Everyone at home. So we decided to take an effort actually to collect the learnings, to do interviews, etc. So it's more or less me who has been writing this handbook with interviews by collecting notes from our workshops, etc. So and the purpose is that it's internal, that we can give this to new colleagues, mainly in new business, in business purchasing, but also product developers, anyone who is interested. But the main target group are the ones that are setting up the partnerships. And then also, it's nothing we want to share our knowledge, and it's of course available to share externally as well, because there are no secrets, but the purpose is internal. So first of all, I mean, we really felt with the handbook that it was important to create a why are we working with this, and this is something that we're struggling still with IKEA. IKEA is huge, and it's I mean, it's, if we think it's difficult to come out externally with a clear message, is as difficult internally, I would say, because we are so many people. And the why is, of course, that we are here to create an ever better day life for the many people. And we also want to do that in our value chain, and I work specifically in the supply chain. And then one part of this is really to reach out to the groups that we have difficulties in reaching through our existing supply chain. And I think this quote from Sumita, who is the founder of Rangsutra social enterprise in Uttar Pradesh, Rajasthan, Bikaner, etc., in India, has put it very, very nicely here, that what we are doing, empowering people and make new possibilities for people that stands far away from the labor market, simply by creating products. And they're very short KPIs that we are today, through this initiative at Supply that I'm sitting, directly contributing to 30,000 jobs through IKEA production, and 153,000 household menace impacted. And of course, this can sound small if we compare with accelerated programs, with trainings, etc. But I think what we should take into consider is that this is consistent work, that it's not only work like one time or 1 month per year or something like this. This is a consistency, and I would say every job that we make is an effort, because we have to fight for every job, because every job is connected to a product that we need to sell in a marketplace, and it needs to be commercial. And that's why I would say that it is really an effort to contribute directly to 30,000 jobs through our supply chain. And then, of course, we have our IKEA suppliers that also, of course, create the social impact through compliance and our demands. But this is through social business partners specifically. And what we do in the end is that we create global products from the social business partners, food, home furniture, accessories, but it could also be raw material into a product that are sold, and they need to be commercial. And if we could start, perhaps we could have a higher price, but now we can't. It needs to be extremely commercial and affordable. When a customer comes into IKEA store, automatically you go into a certain price mode. So I would say that many of these products, if we would sell them in a shop somewhere, it could be much higher, but in the IKEA store, it needs to be affordable for the many. So why we felt it was so important to write this handbook is that when we are setting up new business partnership, and when we are mapping new business partnership, we are basing it on several different dimensions. We are basing it on the range plans, the business need from a product point of view, the category plans, our categories, that what are they need, the supply expansion, where are we going to expand with from our purchasing areas, and the social challenges. So we are looking into that from all these different perspectives. And then when we are mapping and starting up a new partnership, there are certain prerequisites that we really need to get through to our co-workers, that our target group is to create social impact through economic empowerment for women in vulnerable communities and marginalized groups. That's our main target group. And then the ones that we work with needs to have an established social business model. And they need to have financial capability to scale connected to a key offer, because we are not an incubator. We have simply, where I'm sitting in the business, what we can give is a marketplace. We can give competence through our co-workers. We can give designers that can sort of support the social enterprise in designing an attractive and affordable offer. But we are not an incubator. We don't have any sort of money to give. We can collaborate with social entrepreneurship that Jens is working with. And in a particular part, we can sort of support with grants for trainings, for certifications, etc., but not for infrastructure, not for salaries. That needs to be sort of part of the business case that we do together with the social business partners. And that's why it's so important for our purchasing teams when they are mapping new partners and starting up new partners, that they understand that this needs to be a viable business relationship. And then I will not go through this in detail, but it has come along the year. It has come up several times that what is the difference between IKEA supplier and social business partners? Is something better than the other? And we have often come into that it's comparison between an IKEA supplier and social business partner. Yeah, but this supplier, they are creating a lot of jobs for vulnerable groups, and they are doing a lot of things. Yes, and that's fantastic. It's fantastic that we have IKEA suppliers that are creating jobs for vulnerable groups, that through their scale and through their compliance can contribute to change in certain value chains. But there are differences. The IKEA suppliers, they set up their business model. They want business growth and profit as a starting point. So they set up it in a region where they, and with products and with the offer, where they can maximize the growth in a responsible way, of course. But the social business partners that we are selecting, they have the social impact integrated in the business model, which of course then steers how they are organizing themselves, who they are recruiting, where they have their production, like the quote from Sumita. I mean, she sets up their production in the rural part of Uttar Pradesh, and where there are no other options for women to get like a decent income and a decent job. So this is really the core, and it's not that one thing is better than the other. It's just that this combination, that how we are working, and what we are doing now is that we try to learn from each other, that the IKEA suppliers, that's our plan going forward, that IKEA suppliers shall learn from how we're working with social business partners and how they can integrate social impact into the existing business models. They're not a social business, but they can sort of increase the social impact. And the social businesses can learn from our IKEA suppliers in how to set up their business. So from when we are starting, we really start from what are the business needs. That's our starting point as we sit in the business, because if we don't have a clear business need, we will never be able to have a long-term business partnership. The other part is that, of course, then in combination with this, that what are the social challenges, that in which areas should we focus? And right now we are focusing on South Asia, Southeast Asia. In Jordan is the only country we are in Middle East due to the refugee crisis. And we are also about to set up in Africa. So I think the next phase will be very much East Europe we will look into, Latin and South America. This has been the focus so far. And then we ask our purchasing team to sort of to say that who are the vulnerable and marginalized people in this region. And this is something that we started 2-3 years ago, that we really gave the opportunity for our purchasing team to take the full responsibility for the mapping, because they are the best ones who knows the social challenges in the region. And what is the social business core mission? It's another part that we need to look into. That's so that we see that they fit into our business model, and how mature is the business partner, as we are not an incubator. And also, what type of plan does the social business have for starting up? Do they have financing? Because that's extremely important for us, that the social business partners can actually have a plan for how they can finance a scale up. Do they have external investments? Will they grow organically, etc.? And let's see here, we can take the next slide.
And Anne-Sophie, just a little time check. We're about to head to the hour with Gary still pending. Course. If you have 3 more minutes, it'd be great.
Yeah. So this is sort of how we are planning to start up and to scale. And when we are starting up a partner, we are starting up during 12 months. can be more, but this is more general. We have a development phase where they really learn the IKEA business. And then we have a scale-up phase where we see that, okay, how can we continue the partnership? And how can they either become an IKEA supplier and go into a category? Shall we continue with collections and single articles, but not fully scaled up? Or should we plan for that the partnership should try to find other corporates and other collaboration partners beyond IKEA? So this is sort of how we want to develop, and that we have developed most of the partners. And this was actually what I wanted to share with you, and more than happy, of course, to answer any questions or reflections.
Thanks, Anne-Sophie. And for those of you who haven't had a chance to look at the document, there's many very detailed findings and results also in the document. Is there one or two other questions?
I have
Anyone?
one question, and thank you for that presentation. Super helpful, and I'm wondering how, if at all, IKEA is thinking about diversity and inclusion as it relates to social business, or is that sort of a separate focus in your sort of procurement efforts?
Diversity and inclusion, I would say that that's built in. I mean, the social business partners that we are working with, they have the built-in, I would say all of them, but of course they are targeting, I mean, they are targeting different groups that they want to include. And then when it comes to our regular supply chain, that's something that we work with, and that is also part of our compliance and supply development, that how our regular IKEA suppliers really can integrate diversity and inclusion. But of course, there's a lot to do, especially in certain areas, but we have many good examples from existing IKEA suppliers, and some do more and some do less. And our social business partners, I would say, are working extremely focused on this. But they are targeting different groups, of course. Some are targeting women, some are targeting people with different abilities, etc.
Thanks, Anne-Sophie. Maybe last question from my end. It's super interesting that you're building this as an internal resource to educate your own supply chain managers. Have you thought about sharing this outside in a way where I think many companies would benefit from the lessons learned that you've had over the last couple of years? Have you thought in any way other than putting it online, sharing your learnings and lessons learned with other companies in similar spaces?
Yes, we are more than happy to do that, of course, and we are sharing this on our external website. We will do it when we are building up the knowledge hub, etc. But I think, and we are more than happy to share, but my primary task is to start up new partnerships and to support them to grow, and it's not primarily to sort of to share externally. So we do it when we can. And it might be that when we are growing the initiative, that we have the possibilities of sort of reaching out to a wider audience. But right now we are quite few people actually working with this. So our focus is really to increase the social impact.
Yeah, I'm getting also lots of pointers that there is many questions. So I'm sure that we'll be back with a few, maybe via email, but thanks a lot for now for sharing and taking it out. In terms of sharing, and I totally see your time constraints, maybe that is a good overlap to Gary from the Social Entrepreneurship World Forum, and just at the moment actually building the community of practice, which could be the perfect forum to host these kinds of things, I guess. But really eager to hear more from your plans, Gary, and thanks again for joining us.
Thank you so much. Have a nice evening.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Daniel. You heard a Scottish voice speaking from Australia. You're not going to hear one speaking from Scotland. I'm Irish and located in Scotland, and I'm happy to be in dialogue with you today. I'm going to shorten what I was going to say to try and catch up on time, but it's really to give you an overview. The Social Enterprise World Forum started in 2008, and from that time we've had a focus on social procurement. Social traders were one of our founding board members. We've been working with intermediaries around the world, including Social Canada, Social USA, Social Enterprise UK, and a whole range on different countries to grow social procurement, because it is by some distance the best way to create value for social enterprises by expanding their markets. So we've seen, as we've run an annual forum each year, we've seen an incremental increase in interest in social procurement, both from social enterprises, from governments around the world, both national governments, state and provincial governments, municipal governments, and also from corporates. And we're, it's fabulous to hear of the innovative and pioneering work that groups like IKEA and SAP are doing as corporates leading in the space. When we pivoted our event to digital last year, we had 5 of the most popular sessions on video download were on social procurement. We were completely flabbergasted by that. We thought it would be all of the inspirational, motivational keynotes, but it wasn't. It was things like community benefit clauses, masterclass, and how to build social procurement systems. So we gave a lot of profile to social procurement, and at the end of the event, the intermediaries in social procurement came to us and said, we would really like SEWF to establish an international community of practice. So to put all the resources, the news and views together, and to be a vehicle for collaboration. So since January, we've been working on that, and we're going to launch it on Tuesday next week at our policy forum. And it will have a number of sections: news and views on social procurement. There's a launch of an initiative in Malaysia today, and that will be featured next week. We look at resources on social procurement, because we find that the collaboration at a systems and process level is actually really, really fruitful in the social procurement area. There's a high level of transferability across systems from businesses and from government and social procurement. So having a space to share those resources for people to acknowledge where they've come from, to adapt them to their own context, is really going to help the acceleration of social procurement. And I guess most of all, we want to, and we intend to, establish a range of projects in our collaborative space. So this can be between public sector policymakers and each other, and procurement officers and each other, between the intermediaries who are working with us in the social economy to advance social procurement, or amongst corporate procurement managers and buyers who are interested in collaborating with others. So there are 3 target groups. The community practice is essentially closed to social enterprises, because the focus is on the social procurement intermediaries and the commercial sector and public sector champions. So we will be launching that next week, and we will be working with a number of organizations on this call, hopefully quite a lot, as well as our global social procurement community, to make sure that that the community of practice really advances the uptake of social procurement around the world. And Yasmina's question earlier around government being involved and not being involved, we clearly see government as an accelerator. In countries where government is directly involved in creating systems for social procurement, it is much easier to bring in the commercial sector, because they recognize that if they're tendering for government contracts, they need to have credentials in social procurement. And the tools and the processes are also very transferable. And I think we have achieved in many cases some systems change and some process change. But I would say that we're at the early adopter stage globally. And we've identified and we've worked with and supported a range of innovators and early adopters to introduce social procurement systems. But now is the time to push on and to involve lots more countries and lots more people in the conversation, to make sure that the opportunity that COVID has created for systemic change is actually used and harnessed to create a social procurement marketplace that would literally have been inconceivable 10 years ago. So that's what we're working on, and we look forward to working with you to include commercial sector partners, public sector partners, foundations, and social procurement intermediaries in that discussion. So I'm very conscious of time, so I'll stop and open for any questions.
Thanks so much, Gary. And I know that there's various conversations going on bilaterally between everybody or many people here on the call with you. And thanks so much again for sharing that. I have a question before everybody else probably also jumps on it, but we were talking about creating demand from a public procurement perspective, or at least from a regulatory perspective. Do you see any chance to create a pool from the EU, well, maybe US, but let's stick with the EU for now, a pool that would then also enable sourcing from social entrepreneurs in developing countries? So basically creating the pool out of the EU through global supply chains?
We're working with partners like Good Market to ensure that social procurement isn't just about local market and local social enterprises, that it recognizes this is one of the ways that, for instance, governments can achieve some of their international development targets by ensuring that the opportunities they have to procure and collaborate with others also addresses this. I mean, it is completely true to say that for the first decade of social procurement, most of the advances at national level have been made in developed economies. And for us, it's not satisfactory to leave it at that. We need to actively collaborate with you and others to ensure that this is that other economies are involved. So we're pleased to be working with partners in India and Ethiopia and elsewhere to ensure that the conversation is broadened.
Awesome. Thanks, Gary. Who else wants to jump in? I'm aware, as I mentioned, that you've all had conversations and we're at the top of the hour. Yeah. But I'm sure there's many conversations to come in the future and many discussions to be had. We've talked about unusual partners. I know that Emily, Yasmina, and you have talked about the corporate readiness criteria. And I think this is now starting to connect all of the dots that are out there. And I think all of us are excited that there are more dots out there than we have all expected initially. So I think that gives us all the boost also to continue working on this in a way that it's integrative and added value to the entire sector. With that, thanks a lot, Gary, for taking the time. Thanks a lot, everyone, for taking the time to listen today. And we're all very much looking forward to continue this.